Let's wait for it. There he is. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. First I'd like to share the screen so I can use this one. Minimaliseren. Run. So, welcome to Revit GG up till now meetup at our office at RoosRos. We have a tight schedule, so first I will start with the introduction, and then Jacob will have the podium and do his thing. Afterwards, it's a little bit free. We're not really sure what we want to do. I just ask everybody. There's not really a lot of people who want to show something. There are a few who have a question. So yeah, feel free to ask that question, and perhaps if it takes a lot of some work, perhaps Bart can help you with it just somewhere else. And if you think that Jacob can help you, then you can ask him also if he can take a look. So after Jacob, it's a little bit free. We'll see what will happen. And at 5 o'clock, perhaps we have a wrap up and have something to drink. Go on. So this is our office. Welcome again. And these are our colleagues. This enthusiastic picture has been taken half a year ago, before we were raising some money to beat cancer. But most of the time we're actually working on projects. This is just a few pictures. We do big buildings, small buildings, everything in between. If my database is correct, we have been working on 105 Revit projects this year. And the biggest was 37,000 square meters and the smallest was 31, so that's a really tiny house. And the building here at the left bottom, I have just finished after 3 years. So yeah, something about that. So let's just step out of this technical part, because meetups are not really new. Definitely here in the Netherlands, we have a lot of folder swamps, and we try to use it again. This is actually near my house. I live in Alblasserdam, that's near Kinderdijk. Kinderdijk is world famous, except in the Netherlands. I have never heard of it when I was young, but okay. And here you can see a little bit that small parts of lands are connected to bigger parts, and all in the end they can put water outside of the polder and get it dry. So I think a meetup like this looks a little bit like what you see here, what we did in the past. But it's a little bit more technical now, I think. So yeah, we're actually talking about computers, technical stuff. And so let's talk about this parallel. Let's say this lot, that's our office. And we will tell you a little bit about how we work with scripting and updates and maintenance, stuff like that. And then we move on to a bigger part. So this is the first thing that you need to know. We work on multiple projects, multiple Revit versions at once. That's the choice, of course. But yeah, that is the practice. The project that I just showed, I've worked on that for 3 years, and it's still in Revit 2022. So if we talk about maintenance and about scripting, it's also about creating something that will work in different versions. Every year, this guy will give some updates about the API changes, and it's really a source of knowledge. And here are just a few examples what has been passed in a few years. In 20, the unit type changed, and in 21 there was some things with images that I can remember, and in 22 some filters, some filter methods are changed just a little bit, so I have to change all my scripts because of this API changes. So this is how it looks like. This is just two scripts, a dashboard script and an IFC export script. And what I mostly do is that I add a version, a Revit version, in my script. So later on in the script, I can say if your version is this, then you have to do that. Well, that's basically what it is and how we work. Those scripts, perhaps you notice right away, those are big Python scripts, and we have them centrally in our office. So every version just looks at the file that's central. It's not in a Dynamo script itself. So we can change it also outside of Dynamo. That's also a decision. And of course, most versions you don't use, but there are multiple that you do. Just another example, because you have something like this API changes also in Dynamo. Well, perhaps those are not the most best practices. The Dynamo version is a little bit harder to grasp, but you can get it. And sometimes what I do over here, that's definitely not the best practice, but I did it anyway, is using Dynamo nodes in my Python node. So when the API changes, I also need to grab the Dynamo version also. And here are also some different kind of ways that we use Dynamo scripts, like generating room coverings or even generating complex fire compartments. What also happens is that when the API changes, there's also some consequences for view extensions. I don't build view extensions, but Monocle is a view extension, and well, those view extensions also need to change when the API changes. So we're back again. This was what we do at our office, but we also use packages, and perhaps those are the same packages that you also use. So let's dive into those. Every year, when there's a new Revit version, I will download the newest packages from that moment, and most of the time we will keep that for a complete year, because it's more important that it works than that it is the latest version. So this year we also did that, and this is what you will get. A lot of packages get some information notes. That doesn't really mean that it don't work, but there is something going on there. It's hard to maintain a package in a way that it's always up to date. So here are 8 packages that do have some things. Here are another, and Archilab is one of the only package that that didn't have a information in it. So yeah, what I did was just asking a few package owners a few questions, and I asked them 3 questions. What is your most important tip or experience when maintaining and updating your package? Do you have a tip for upgrading from IronPython to CPython? And is there anything Autodesk could do to simplify maintenance for you package? administrator. I got a few answers back, and I'm very glad. John Pearson, that's the owner of Monocle and Rhythm. And he gave a few tips. He wrote a blog about maintaining just C# packages and also a video. And he left Python for a couple of years now because he thought C# was a better solution for him. And the next one was Konrad Sobon, and he's the owner of the Archilab package. Sorry, do you see? And he also gave some comments. He actually said that he wasn't planning to upgrade the last R and Python nodes that he had, but if he would, then he would change it and put it into his zero-touch package. And he also mentioned that Python nodes require a lot of manual time. So, next one, Maarten Vroegendewij, perhaps his colleague should join us, but he's not there, John Mol. And he's the owner of the Gistobim package, and he also gives some feedback. He created some nodes and he put some links in his node, and that was hard to maintain. So he said, well, we should do it in a better way. Sometimes there is a lot of text here. I can share the PowerPoint presentation if you want. You can read it again later, and there's also some links inside, so perhaps you can use it. He also said it was very difficult to keep his package up to date, and he said, well, think carefully about naming conventions. It could be a pain in your ass, zeg maar. What's your most important tip? In C Python, the possibilities are limited, and he works a lot with like pictures, and C Python really deals with those differently than R and Python, so he had a hard time with that. He also had some tips for Autodesk. So the first one is actually an interesting one. He said, well, why won't we allow multiple administrators for a package? Perhaps things like that will come back later. Because it could be tricky to maintain a package over the years. Next one, Thomas. He's the owner of the BIMorph nodes, and he had also a lot of text. So what he says, just to make it a little bit shorter, is that he says, well, just think about what you're trying to build. Don't build hundreds of small nodes that don't do really a lot of good things. Just think about improving a workflow, make something big that actually building sophisticated nodes that add significant value to your user base. And that's one thing that he shared. Also use an IDE. It's easier to script, and use Python from file, Python node from file, because it's easier to maintain. If your nodes are everywhere, then it's harder to change it. Well, because this is partly what his business is like, he also had some ideas about improving his business, and it's also something to consider. Andreas Diekman, he just wrote to me an hour ago, and I'm very glad he did. he also had a few ideas using GitHub that can be handy for maintaining your package. Andreas Diekman is the owner of Clockwork, and that's a very nice package. It has a lot of small Python nodes, so I would be very interested if Andreas and Thomas are talking to each other, because they're really different approaches, I guess, but I think they both do a good, very good job, and I'm very grateful that they do. And he used Python in a way that he can actually serve multiple Revit versions, and I think that's something that we do in our office also. Then about the upgrading, well, most of the things are easy. He starts very positive and he ends like, I don't like to see Python.
Oh, he's a bit mother.
Yeah. And he also had a link that I haven't checked, but I definitely will. Point 5, he says that there was a Dynamo forum post about enumerations, and you will need those. So I definitely will check that link later. Yeah, and he thinks Autodesk is improving, and he likes that a lot. So we're back again. There's definitely something going on. So just check all the waterways. Perhaps there's something leaking. What is going on with the latest changes? And I think Jacob will get into that also. First of all, the things that I discovered is that Autodesk has already done a lot of documentation about the upgrade from IronPython to CPython. It's a technical question, but I think Jacob will talk about that later. And that's something that we need to do now. So that's perhaps the reason why I chose this theme for this meetup. Because it's a lot of work. It needs to be done, and there are some problems. So, but yeah, Autodesk has some documentation. On the other hand, it's also not new. The world around us has solved this update for 10 years ago. So, yeah, you can find things online about what you can expect. Also in the Dynamo GitHub page, there's also some more documentation about what you can expect. And this one is also something that I discovered. There's also an online Python 2.3 converter. Dynamo has something on its own, but you can also try a different one and, well, perhaps get the best out of both. Those are links. If you need those, you can click on them later. And what I also did, this is a Dynamo script. I tried to recreate all kinds of problems that were mentioned in the documents, and I wanted to see it for myself. So I made a script. I can share it with people who want to try it. This is built so things will break. So you will get notice like this doesn't work, and perhaps this is a solution, and you can see it for yourself. Just this is how it looks like. So first there's a problem and the solution, and there are, I don't know, 20 different kinds of problems that are mentioned, and I put it in the script. On the left there's a IronPython node, and on the right there's the same script, but that in a CPython environment, so it will work differently. Well, perhaps this is how my brain works. You can read a lot of stuff, but I want to experience it myself. That's why I built this kind of things. And they do work. This is another part of the script. Here I use the there command just to see what the differences are. And yeah, we're back again. And now I really want to invite Jacob to do this part. We're very glad, Jacob, that you can join us. Here's a print screen of your Dynamo forum profile. You work with Autodesk for a couple of years, and you're very knowledgeable about Dynamo. So I'm really excited what you can tell us. So
thanks for having me.
Switch down, yeah, to
and then here. So
yeah, we will.
Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, so I will take over from here. I'll start by doing good.
Can I make it bigger?
That would be nice.
Sorry?
Dat zou fijn zijn.
Yeah.
Misschien in de chat zeggen.
Okay, I will. Yeah, this is a little bit bigger, and so that's the one. Yeah. Okay. Now we can. Okay.
All right.
Yes.
So thank you, everybody. It's great to be presenting to you guys. I'm laughing as I see that old Dynamo forum profile because I'm now an implementation consultant based out of Stockholm. That listed me as a technical support specialist, I think, or maybe premium support specialist. But I've changed hats a few times. I'm now an implementation consultant based out of Stockholm. Background is in architecture, but my specialties are generative design, automation, and BIM, and I've been with Autodesk since 2017. Now, this is the most boring slide that I'm going to present today. I promise that much, but it's one that I have to present because otherwise people get very mad at me, and I really like my job, so I don't want to upset the people that this upsets. It's a whole bunch of legal speak that can basically be broken down to something much simpler along the lines of this. Shooting star falling, maybe a plane, Superman, let's not buy just yet. So don't make any purchasing decisions based on any of the forward-leaning product statements I'm about to make. And I have a feeling I'm going to make a lot. You want to buy your software based on the capabilities that it has today, as opposed to what it might have tomorrow or what it had yesterday or last month or what it could be in 10 years, right? Buy your software based on what it does at the moment and make your investments accordingly as well. So here's what I've got on the agenda. And because there was so much Python, I'm actually going to squeeze some extra Python comments in before we get going around the framing the problem piece. But it's a pretty packed plan. I wanted to start by saying I'm sorry. The maintenance problem is kind of broken. Actually, I will go so far as to say, yes, it is broken. This isn't something that was really thought through when Dynamo originally got started back in 2008, believe it or not, right? So people who were first thinking about this only thought about, I can write a script for myself that works for me, it works today, and everything's beautiful. And believe it or not, it dates back to AutoCAD before Revit, which is kind of crazy. So knowing that, acknowledging that it's a problem, I'm also going to acknowledge that there's no quick fix. There's no easy way out of having to maintain your graphs and your codes in your scripts. I'm sorry, right? Just know that this is something that we're all in together. Every single year when a new Revit version comes out, and actually it's not even every year, it's every single Revit release that comes out, I grab myself a beverage and I say, okay, what's going to have broken today? And then I go and I run my tests and I find out. And that's sadly the state that we're in. So let's start by defining what Dynamo is. So Dynamo is an open source software platform for visual programming. It's ideal for geometry creation and manipulation, as well as process automation, right? It does stuff in Revit very well. It makes shapes and forms very well. It's integrated into Alias. It's been integrated into Fusion at one point, AutoCAD, Civil 3D, all sorts of different design software. And all of that enables new workflows. It has three goals. One wants to provide a simple, coherent, and capable tool to foster a collaborative computational ecosystem and enable users at every level of ability. So let's now talk about what that code is, because this is a tool for writing code. Per Google, a code is a series of coded software instructions to control the operation of a computer or other machine. Per me, it's instructions to make a computer do stuff. So when I look at this Dynamo graph, this is a series of instructions to make a computer do stuff. Even if you think, well, I'm just putting nodes on canvas, I'm maybe writing some Python, I'm consuming somebody else's Python, and I'm just saying this data goes to here, that data goes to there, they come together in this other thing, and we get a new result. That's writing code. You just don't know it. So once we acknowledge that, this 3 nodes here is the same as all of this C#, they're both writing code, it means we have to start thinking like a software developer, right? Just because you're putting nodes on canvas instead of opening up Visual Studio and typing using statements for 10 minutes rather than just opening Dynamo, you're still a programmer. That means you need to think like one, and that while Dynamo sort of makes the writing the code easier, it was never intended and it has never been asked to make managing your code easier, right? Visual Studio does not make managing your code easier. GitHub does, right? Dynamo is the Visual Studio. Nobody is doing the GitHub yet, right? So a rows by any name, is it really just a different black box that we had with that C# code? So let's look at what goes into all of our different Dynamo environments. First, we've got Dynamo, and then we've got Revit. We build a special version of Dynamo called Dynamo for Revit that gets integrated into Revit. Now I've got Dynamo in Revit. That allows me to get that little bit here of visual programming up in the top right corner of my Revit window. So I can launch Dynamo. And that actually doesn't come together by itself. It's actually got any custom definitions, any packages I've got, and whatever settings I have all together. And then I can take my Dynamo graph and put it into Dynamo, and it runs, and I'm happy. Everybody with me? Cool. All right. So what if I send that graph to somebody who doesn't have that package or that custom definition? They're crying because it's not going to work. What if that package breaks? You're crying because it's not going to work. Even if I put that package back, but I use a different version of Revit and therefore a different Revit API, send that package in, that graph in, we're still crying because it's not going to work. All the different parts of the ecosystem have to align, right? If anything breaks, we're in trouble. So what does that ecosystem look like? The first part is the .NET environment. Anybody use Revit 2025? I can see you all on camera, so feel free to put the hand up if you've launched Revit 2025 before. Yes, good. Okay, we've got a few. Totally new .NET environment. As a Revit user, you probably didn't see that. As an add-in developer, you absolutely saw it because the very first thing you did started differently, right? First time ever we were loading in a different .NET version. Actually, I take that back. First time since 2014. On top of that, we've got our host application. This is Revit, right? And all of its configurations and customizations. And on top of that, we have the Dynamo integration. This comes from the Dynamo team, which includes Dynamo core and the individual settings. And then on top of that, we have our personal customizations to Dynamo, packages and definitions. And then we finally have our graphic self. This is the executing tool, right? Everybody focuses on this because that's what Dynamo shows you. We focus on the graph. We talk about the graph. But what actually causes the graph to not work is one of these parts down below moves. And oddly enough, while our goal is that individual piece, we need to worry about that user configuration, what's host controlled, what's specified, and what's static. When one of those pieces moves, everything else has to shift with it. So in Revit 2025, we shifted to .NET 8. And behind the scenes inside Autodesk, having worked there and having some better insights than most people have, I'll also tell you, we looked at .NET 6 for a bit. So there was a version of Revit that ran in .NET 6 instead of .NET 8. But as that .NET environment shifts, Revit has to shift, which means the Dynamo integration has to shift, which means your Dynamo customizations have to shift. And remember, that happens much slower. And so when Revit actually goes live, maybe you've got some of it out there, maybe not, because those Dynamo package authors aren't paid for their time. It's a labor of love, right? Conrad mentioned in his feedback, I've got a kid and 2 companies that I have to worry about. My Archilab package kind of has to take a back seat. And so when you move your graph over into this new environment, it might not be entirely supported by the stuff underneath it anymore. Eventually, the hope is that it will be. You'll add new customizations in, you'll add new code in, you'll write pieces to fix what was there before, but there's no guarantee that just using what you had before is going to work. So as any part of the ecosystem changes, everything above it has to change, right? And the real pain here is there's no agreement or alignment on the timeline. I can tell you the .NET integration and host are all going to be aligned because Revit's always going to release, or currently has always released, with a version of Dynamo that's built for that version of Revit, right? That happens at our global launch. Anytime we issue an update to Revit and an update to Dynamo, everything's in alignment. It's everything thereafter that we have to worry about. So it's the user settings, it's the add-ins that we put into Revit, it's the Dynamo configuration, it's the packages, it's the definitions, and everything else. Now, having covered that, let's talk about some quick things to ponder. Now, memes here are for fun, not necessarily because they're totally relevant, but I wanted to make sure we weren't getting too wordy. So remember, we're writing software, but we're trained as architects and engineers for the most part. We need to learn from those software developers. So we need to start thinking about concepts like sprint planning, what we do with GitHub that Andreas mentioned before, how we test our code, etc. Right? If you don't know what a pull request is, and after these many years of writing Dynamo graphs, don't be afraid to ask. That's what the community's here for. We're all growing together. All right. The next thing to ponder when we get into our annual maintenance is the API changes. The .NET and the integrations, while they're aligned, they might be different from what we used before. The changes to any one piece will break existing nodes within our graph, the entire graph itself, our individual scripts, and all of those require testing to validate some sort of consistency in terms of behavior, right? And again, every year, every time I see a new Revit's released, I get really excited. Oh, what did we fix? It fixes that thing that's been driving me nuts since I first started using Revit in 2003, right? New stair tool, hooray, right? New railings, whatever it might be. Get really excited. And then I go and I open my Dynamo graphs and then I turn into the sad puppy. Every single time. And this is the biggest piece. And I said I was going to talk a little bit more in depth about Python. So security. How many people would like to see their company get ransomware? No hands are going up. Awesome. I love that. All right. The thing with security is more connected tools means you have more security risks. The more things you bring in there, the more difficult it is. And it's impossible to know when you're going to have to push a security update, right? And so Revit updates stuff all the time. There was a slide on screen earlier that mentioned Revit 2016. If you are running Revit 2016 in a production environment, you are putting your entire company at risk. It's time to upgrade. Don't be more than 4 versions behind the current release. All right. That includes IronPython 2. Everybody loves IronPython 2 because it's the last version of IronPython that was worked on by Microsoft directly. That's why it integrated so well with .NET. Microsoft gave up on IronPython 2, and IronPython 2 development sort of stalled out. Once that corporate sponsorship went away, people stopped treating it as the day job because it wasn't anymore. Right? So we have to take a real hard look at that IronPython 2. The last time Python 2.7 was updated. Anybody want to take a guess for security patches and bugs? If you said January of 2020, congratulations. If you thought it was more secure than last touched in January of 2020, hopefully this is a wake-up call. So we want to move past the IronPython and into the Python, even if that means it's breaking some of our stuff. It's not a question of if a bug comes out, it's a question of when. All right. So don't keep using IronPython just because, right? Anytime you ignore security, it's going to have the most impact on the business. Because even if you meet a deadline, even if you save an extra 4 hours, versus having to do it manually on this one project. That extra 4 hours saved is gone as soon as there's an incident, right? And there's no going back from that. This is the one thing as developers that I catch all the time, like, yes, let's move past this. Let's get secure. That's the best way to be safe, all right? So think real careful about that kind of content. Next thing to consider is sort of the static portions, some things we cannot control, right? How Revit add-ins impact our Dynamo graph execution is something that nobody really knows until you test, because we don't know what's in that Revit add-in. If it uses Newton Soft Chasson 1.3, it's going to break your Dynamo. There's no way around that. So we got to get that add-in updated, or we have to choose Dynamo or the add-in, right? So always test before you install your add-ins, always test after you install your add-ins, and check your Revit journals for API_error. Because anytime a Revit add-in uses a conflicting library, it will list API_error, and it'll say such and such add-in uses a conflicting version from one that was previously loaded in, because Revit can only have one version of a library loaded at a time, because that's how Windows works. Other things to ponder: legal ownership. So anytime you use somebody else's code, you need to credit them. This includes open source code and the stuff that's in packages. So if you've ever opened up Clockwork, a Clockwork node, copied the Python and pasted it in, and then sent that graph on to somebody else, you've actually broken the terms of the end user licensing agreement. Andreas probably doesn't care. In fact, I'm certain Andreas doesn't care. But we want to keep that in mind as we do that kind of stuff. Just transferring stuff out of the individual packages and into Python nodes on Canvas is a legal risk. And it also moves your technical debt. More on that in a minute. Next up, scope. Graphs that do everything in one run are going to be much harder to maintain than graphs that form individual parts and pieces, right? Now, Thomas had a good point. If I'm working as a C# developer, one node that does the entire problem is much easier for me to maintain than a bunch of little parts and pieces. But as a Dynamo author, 3 graphs is easier for me to maintain than one graph where any part that breaks along that string means the entire automation is no good. If I can get the first half automated and sent out, and instead of saving 4 hours, we're saving 3, that's a win, right? So keep that in mind as you're sort of organizing your graph library, right? So I recommend mini small graphs instead. Yes, it's more runs, which some users dislike, but it's going to be much easier for you to maintain. Open up Dynamo Player, hit play on the first, wait a half minute, hit play on the second, wait a half minute, hit play on the third. That's a massive time savings versus having to do that content manually, right? You can also look into Dynamo Multiplayer, add-ins, Relay for Revit, and stuff like that from John Pearson, who's mentioned before. PyRevit can also help to sequence running those graphs so that users don't have to hit those buttons consecutively. And then the next thing here is technical debt. So every single tool that you use is going to have to be maintained. The more custom code you put in there, the more code that you write from scratch, the more thing that you're going to have to maintain. At a minimum, every custom function you write, you want to plan on 15 minutes for every update to Revit. If Revit updates 4 times a year, every single custom function is an hour of time I have to have in my budget annually. That adds up really fast, right? So even if it totally works, that's 15 minutes. If it doesn't totally work, now I've got 15 minutes to find out that it didn't work, and then the additional time to figure out how to fix it, right? The more code you consume, the more risk you have of now what, right? So every time I use a package, Clockwork or Archilab or something like that, that is also going to have some sort of cost to it, okay? This is the nature of building software. Revit has the same problem, right? If we choose to use a particular library, we have to make sure that library will be maintained for X amount of time. And if not, we don't ship it, which is exactly why we don't have IronPython 2 anymore, right? So whenever possible, we want to sort of evaluate what's the most likely to be maintained by somebody else. The standard answer to that in all cases is the out of the box nodes from Dynamo. If it's in the core library, it's most likely to be kept up to date. If it's a third-party package, there's no guarantee. And if it's my own code, that's my own time that I'm spending. And towards that your own guarantee, this is the standard license that comes with every package that's updated to Package Manager. I've added that bit of highlighting. The software is provided as is without warranty of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to the warranties of merchantability, fitness for a particular purpose, and non-infringement. No warranty. There's no guarantee this is going to continue to work in a future build. This is something that you agree to as soon as you download that package, right? All right, the last thing to consider, now that we've understood all those things that we have to take into account, is our budget. Everything that we write, every bit of code that we write, we've got a sum of in hours that we have to account for, right? If the sum of that hours is more than you have available, the demand on your time is more than you actually have to actually get stuff written. So make a case for your management. Hey, we saved 4 hours every time we ran this graph, and we ran this graph 20 times last month. That's pretty easy to say, hey, that's 80 hours. That's 2 weeks I should have to fix this and maintain this, right? If you can't make that case, you need to figure out how to buy time from somebody else, hire a consultant, Thomas Mahan, Autodesk ourselves, John Pearson, Conrad, some of the other people who were mentioned before will all take those kind of projects. Or you need to look into an alternative tool or just do it manual, right? Whenever possible, get those updates, but accept that we might actually wind up have to build another me in order to make this stuff work. Now I wanted to cover briefly some of the lessons learned. So when you're working on your graphs and doing your annual maintenance, you want to make sure you're putting some time in to upskill not just yourself, but also others. So we want to leverage the tool, make sure everyone can leverage the tool. So everybody at a minimum is a consumer, but they're not necessarily going to contribute to its production. If you've got users in the company who aren't leveraging the Dynamo graphs you're producing, either it means there's a discrepancy in the quality of the Dynamo graphs you're building, or it means you haven't let people know and you haven't educated them on the benefits of using these tools. So definitely take advantage of that. After that, the next level up are our editors, and I should have been clicking through. We want to increase the number of editors that we have by upskilling the existing consumers. Somebody can easily go in and change a number slider value to get a different result, or point at a different Excel file to get a different result, right? Teach people how to do that, to make those simple edits, right? Not just the edits that we see in Dynamo Player, which is where most of our consumers are using it, but stuff that's a little bit deeper. After that, the next step up in the users by skill is authors. We want to train as many editors up into authors as possible. The more authors you have, the more automation that you're going to get, right? These are people who are capable of building a Dynamo graph from scratch. They're not doing entirely new functions, but they're able to string any series of functions together. They're able to find packages and use those. They do need to keep in mind the stuff that we're going over today, but as developers, maybe that's on us to enable everybody else. So our developers are going to be the one who build tools to enable people to build graphs. These people build packages, Python code, C# code, and stuff like that to enable those new features. Now, the next question, do we do nodes or Python or packages in C#? And what's the best way to write this stuff? So there is no one answer here. Sometimes C# is going to be better. Sometimes Python's going to be better. I pretty much always say put everything in a package because it's easier to get it out to the next user. But everybody's got a different opinion, right? Andreas said Python's great, but I hate CPython. Conrad said, I want to get as far away from Python as quickly as possible. He actually told me I've moved everything out of Python already back in 2021. And I pointed out a couple that he had hanging over and he's like, oh my gosh, I thought I already covered those. Thank you. I'll get to them later. He still hasn't gotten to them, but eventually they're just going to be deprecated, right? John Pearson said, yeah, I don't work with Python at all. I try to get as far away from it as possible and just work in C#. It's up to the developer in terms of their skill set, what's best for them and the use case. If it's a one-time thing and I know I'm not going to have to edit it again, I'm probably going to use Python. If it's something I need to scale to every user in the entire world, I'm probably going to use C#. That's my personal opinion. C# will actually run many orders of magnitude faster than Python. Python is no faster than a DYF. If you put a custom node together with many nodes inside of it, or design script. The reason for that, we have to start a Python engine up basically a little virtual machine inside Dynamo that runs that Python script for every Python node that you have on Canvas, right? So keep that in mind. There's not necessarily a speed gain with Python if you're writing your code well. And as noted, sizable security risk to just use IronPython 2. Don't do that anymore. Time to move past that. It was great in the early 2020s and 2010s even, but since then, there's just too many concerns with Python, the IronPython 2 engine anyways, and IronPython 3 isn't quite fully supported. Make no purchasing decisions, but the Dynamo team is actively looking into a new Python net implementation, which will make the CPython problems kind of go away. You might see this in a beta build in the future. As of now, not yet. All right, so next piece, things should be automated. All of your testing you want to automate. Revit journals are great for this. Drag and drop it on your Revit icon and you will get the results, right? You want to build your journals for testing. This is literally how the Revit team does all of their testing every year. They use Revit journals. Every feature is callable through a journal, so we know we can run a Dynamo graph through journals. I've got an example of this coming on. There's also a great Boost Your BIM WordPress site blog that has a great example of building your own journals. I'm going to tag that a couple times here. Next piece, always consider, do I want to use a package or do I want to write my own code? Dependency management is the problem with using a package. Writing your own Python, it has a lot more time to it in terms of maintenance, right? If I can ask John Pearson, hey, I found a bug in this for Revit 2026, can you fix it? Right? Next May, June, July, I will probably send John that exact message and he will usually fix it within a week, right? I don't know when I would have time to fix that. It would take me probably a lot more than a week to write that code from scratch for that package that John's put together. So there's definitely some value there. Next up, deployment and monitoring. All your users should get all your standard packages, all your standard package graphs as well. We don't want to keep stuff on a server or cloud path. That's again a security risk. And we always want to overwrite or update your Dynamo settings globally. There's a great feature in Revit 2024.1, I think is when it came out, but it's definitely in 2025 to enable you to import and export your Dynamo settings, right? This means you can configure which paths people see. You can configure what your group styles are and everything else and send that out to those other users. So leverage that. And we also want to include both Dynamo Player and the Dynamo UI in order to make stuff work. And the only way to get all this stuff done is to partner with your IT team, right? Everybody's got somebody who's managing the server in the background. Everybody's got that somewhere. Those people can usually write the script to deploy all your Dynamo graphs, all your Dynamo packages, and get it to every single user in the company in under an hour. It's already built into what they do in their day-to-day job. Leverage them. Don't try and rebuild the wheel and say, I'll build a custom add-in to Dynamo that will copy stuff over or will put stuff on a Dropbox link and run all the packages off the Dropbox link or something like that. Just work with your IT team and things will go smoother. Also want to make sure we document anything and everything. Groups and notes everywhere, groups outlining what sections the code do, notes to reference things to watch for, changes that you make, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, this will break in 2025. We also want to comment all our code. So the Python code that we saw up on screen before was great. It would be even better if we put the / or the hashtag and then the comment to let everybody know why we put that particular line there, because we don't know the next person in how skilled they're going to be with Python. And I've seen too many people go out and just remove lines and it works for them, but it doesn't work for the next person because that line was removed. So more is more as far as comments go, because we don't know who that next person is. Want to reduce scope as much as possible. So archive and move on situations such as one-off graphs. If I built a graph for this specific project, it doesn't really apply. Just archive it and move on. It doesn't have to be in the library. Graphs that have been replaced by an add-in, tell people to use the add-in instead of the graph. Graphs that are only used once or twice a year. Unless it's saving me a week of time, it's probably not worth maintaining it, right? So we got to track those and find out if they're actually being used. Graphs where a future host version or update to Revit or something like that makes the graph no longer worthwhile. right? Take advantage of those. Graphs that take N hours to update, but are only going to save a fraction of that a year, probably not worth updating it, right? And then graphs that show sufficient return on investment to justify an add-in, right? A great example of that is tools to automate creating views, right? Or tools to export IFC. There's other tools out there for that can really save you a lot of time if you just buy the add-in for the 3 users who might need it. All right, so my plan. One set of packages, definitions, and graphs for each integration version. Don't try and use the same package path for all your Dynamo builds. Put them on the individual systems, not just the packages, but also the graphs. Every custom code, every bit of Python should be in a DYF, and every DYF should be in a package. All packages are deployed to Package Manager to make sure you have access to the joy that is workspace dependencies. So we're not going to eat the elephant. These are the 8 steps. Set the update scope, budget the time, work older to newer, prep your packages, prep your tests, test and then alter, then deploy and monitor, and archive or save. Our scope, we want to make sure we're in bounds for what we want to do. Don't try and make your graph do more than what it needs to be, right? Always start by reviewing your host application API, then look at your Dynamo changes, and then move any graphs that are no longer needed out of scope, put them in the archive. If it's something that nobody ran last year, we don't need to update it, right? Define our supportive environment from there, and then revisit that continuously. We're going to build this for Revit 2025.2, right? Or Revit 2024.3 or whatever build, right? Revisit that as Revit versions come out. We also need to budget the time. Once we know the scope, outline how long it's going to take. These are the things that are changed. I'm worried about these. I need a little bit more time. I'm not worried about this update. It was a security patch for a dependency. We just move on. So once we figure out that, we plan some sprints. How long for test prep? How long for testing? Estimate which graphs are going to need the most help. Track this just like any other buildable project. I need this amount of hours. I need to be done by this date, and I've got a time frame of X. We're then going to start testing in the oldest version that we haven't tested yet. So if I'm testing Revit 2024.3 and 2025.2, we're going to go ahead and test 2024.3. Then we're going to test 2025.2. Then, I don't know, 26.0 or whatever else might come from next, right? Step up on each change. The annual release is likely 4 tests in total, once every major release point, right? And then you want to update your base model that you test against across all those versions. Otherwise, you have to sort of run each test individually. Run the update date for each test individually. We then are going to prep our packages for each of our environments. I literally just copy Revit 2023 packages up to 2024 and 24 to 25, then open them up and see which ones don't load, right? Now I know which ones I have to fix, check my error for logs, and then I move into testing. Before I test, I need to prep my tests. The way I do that is with journal. So this is what the journal that I use for testing Dynamo graphs looks like. Over on the right, journals are text files. The journal is going to open the model, open Revit, open the model, launch Dynamo, open the graph, run the graph, and then stop. At that point, I look, did the run complete without errors? And did the change to the Revit model happen? If either of those are no, then I've got a problem I have to address. This is the tool I use for building the journals, right? If you want to do it manually, there's the Boost Your BIM WordPress article, or you can use my tool. There's a link coming to this at the end, right? It's a simple bit of Python, and it just modifies the journal text to include the right model and the right Dynamo graph. After it's passed, after the test finishes, if it passes, we save it to the deployment folder, close the graph, and move on. If the test failed, we estimate the time to fix it. Look at it real quick. I can fix this in 5 minutes. Oh yeah, I've seen that. It's the list flatten node changed or the if node changed. That's super easy, right? Make the change, save it, close it, rerun the test, make sure it runs without errors, and then save it to the deployment folder. If it's going to take longer than 15 minutes, I save it to a separate folder. It's called to edit, and then move on. Once I'm done testing everything the first time, I go back and I fix all my broken graphs, update any packages, message John, hey, I got a problem. Can you fix it? Look for alternatives, find out whatever Python might be broken and update that as needed. And exceed the hours, evaluate if it's worth maintaining before you proceed. If it's taking a long time, is this really worth it, right? Then we deploy and monitor. Get all the graphs out, contact your IT team, have them push the graphs. Again, I don't recommend keeping the graphs in a central location. Put them on the individual user system. This encourages people to play with them and edit them. And then also much easier than modifying the Dynamo settings XML for every possible location. After that, we archive periodically or save to new. Sort of keep track of what's been used, evaluate the time to complete it versus not. And now let's get into how the testing works. So I think I'm 5 minutes over right now. I've got another 3 minutes. Sorry. All right. So this is how I build the journals. You can see there, I've got the RVT that I'm going to use for testing. I've got that true or false toggle set to true. I'm going to go ahead and point at the RVT here. We're going to test 2023. I'm going to browse to the path that contains my Dynamo library. One of my favorite features of 2025 is we now use a different method for browsing to a directory. Pointing at my Dynamo graphs folder. Now we're going to point to where do we want to save this stuff? Documents, projects, presentation folder, 2023, journals folder. Okay. Everything looks good. You can now see in the journals folder, there is no content. This is what that Python looks like. Again, I showed it to you before. Just in case there were questions, you can go back and look at the video, and then we hit run. Takes a half second, but there's all those journals. Once the journals are produced, it's time to, oh, I hit go too many times, and now I can't make it play. There we go. Now we can go back and we can play our journals. And this is how we test it. Literally take the journal and drag it to the Revit icon. That's going to launch Revit for me. Notice the mouse isn't moving, right? It's over here. It's static. I'm going to just keep my pointer pointed at it. Still static. Revit's opening for me. There's the model. Dynamo's opening for me. I still haven't moved the mouse. The Dynamo graph is now opening for me. I still haven't moved the mouse. The run has started now for me. I still haven't moved the mouse. The run's completed for me, and now I take control. That's what my graph looks like. So no warnings, no errors, and sure enough, it updated the text to capitalized, which is what I expected. All right, so that's a pretty simple fix. Now, in some cases, you're going to have to make a lot of the same change. Right? Some Dynamo or Revit updates mean you're going to have to change every single graph a dozen times. The if node was a good example of this. Also, Python engine is a good example of this. The Dynamo graph UI, the size of every node on canvas changed in Dynamo 2.13. That's another good example. Fortunately, Dynamo files are JSON files, so they're just text files, and I can edit them like any other text file or JSON. I always want to test first so I know that there isn't in-mass update needed, and I can validate the fix and then fix one and compare the two documents. So after I fix them, I run this kind of graph. So this graph is my Python engine changer. I'm also going to be providing this to you guys as well. Basically, simple inputs. You can see almost all the work is done on Python, right? We've got 5 nodes on canvas. The run just allows me to either execute the Python or not, a directory of Dynamo files to edit, and a directory to save the resulted edited Dynamo files to. That's what the Python code looks like. It's pretty simple. Opens the JSON, finds the nodes key from the JSON element, changes for each node, finds out if it's a Python node. If it is, it changes the engine to CPython, then updates the nodes key for the edited Python nodes, make new Dynamo files, and inform the user what we did. Here's what that looks like in real time. So you can see this is an example of the size of the nodes changed. So everything's slightly overlapping, which is super annoying. We can run this. This is the graph resizer node. So slightly different inputs than before, but the same idea of give me a list of Dynamo files, the scale factor I want for the X, the scale factor I want for the Y, the output directory I want to save to. We hit run started, we get new Dynamo files. And now if I go ahead and open up one of those Dynamo files, so instead of the 22 version, we'll open the 23 version. This is the same graph that we saw before. All of those Dynamo files have now changed size. And we can tell that because I can't see anything. So if I zoom out, suddenly there they are, much bigger, right? So the overlapping nodes problem's fixed. And it did that for my entire library in one run. So somebody like Andreas, who has a package that has 400 nodes in it that have Python, he can change the Python engine for every single one of those custom nodes in one run with that. When you're done, test very carefully. We just modified every single Dynamo file. We don't know how well it's going to work, right? So go back, do your bulk edits, and then test again. All right, so questions and resources. The Dynamo graph I shared, QR code here will bring you to a link on the Dynamo forums for the Python engine changer to go from IronPython to CPython. It will also bring you to the piece to build the Revit journals so that you can automate your testing of your graphs, right? It's currently hidden. The only way you can access this right now is by scanning that QR code or grabbing that link and typing it quickly. So keep that in mind, because when it comes time for your updates in 2026, which is, I don't know, maybe 6 months-ish away at this point, that kind of stuff will really, really help out, right? As well as any updates to 22 or 23, 24 that might come between now and then. Other handy resources, Dynamo's main home on the web, dynamobim.org. The blog has great resources on updating Python in particular. We're probably going to see a new one of those in the very near future as the new Python engine comes out. If you need a different installation of Dynamo builds or of Dynamo, you can get it from dynamobuilds.com. We also have the main code base has been open sourced at github.com/dynamods. You can get through the Dynamo primer. I recommend the developer primer for anybody who's looking to get started with C#. Those are both at primer2.dynamobim.org, and you can engage with the community on the Dynamo BIM forum. That was a good 40 minutes. Any questions? No.
I've got a question. The thing is, sometimes I want to override graphics from a Revit link, but that's not possible yet. Do you know if that's going to be possible in the future or in the near future?
So overriding the graphics for an individual element in a link is not currently possible, and I do not know if it's going to be possible in the near future. The fix to that is probably to use a filter. Grabbing the right filter is very difficult, if not impossible. The other thing that I've seen people do is instead of highlighting the element using an override graphics in view, you can put a crop box together on a copy of the view to really focus in on the area that is having the issue. But I don't think that's going to be fixed in, actually, make no purchasing decisions. I wouldn't expect it to be fixed in 2025 for 3 or 2, which are the currently supported builds. I would be surprised if it's in 26.
All right.
Which means the earliest, I would be surprised if you are able to do anything about this before 27.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. Great question, by the way.
Well,
Any other
questions and API stuff? Is there any plan to add some API applications for model groups in Revit? Because right now, especially the origin point, little to no access.
Yeah. So, again, make no purchasing decisions. I don't know of any plans to make model groups accessible. However, I had on the internal communications channels. Somebody had asked a question on getting the room that an element's in at a particular phase. And I answered that, and they said, wow, that was super quick. I can't believe you knew that. You answered that in less than 2 minutes. Partially it was because I just happened to be looking when they made the original post. The other reason was because that's one of those things I deal with all the time. So I already had the links handy in my bookmarks. And so I gave him all the links and he was like, this is perfect. This is everything I needed. And I went, yeah, no worries. It's the second most annoying thing that I have to deal with. And he said, well, what's the first? And I said, groups. And then 5 different Revit developers reacted to that message with eyeballs, which means the team's aware and they're looking at it. When we'll get it, or if we'll get it, I don't know. But everybody knows that it's a problem and we really want to fix it. The thing is, it's really, really a big change. Probably the second biggest change since the text formatting. Who remembers Revit 2017, where all your text changed? Anybody? Yeah. So believe it or not, the changes to that text editor first started being introduced in Revit 2014 publicly through the API. We started putting changes into the API because we knew whenever we pull that trigger, everybody's text is going to be in a different piece and we need a way for people to fix it in bulk. So it took 3 years to get all those different parts out there so that people could fix the problems that were going to be introduced as we made the text editor better. So yeah, there you have it. Sadly, no plans immediately, but I hope we'll see something soon. Again, I would be shocked if it's in 2026 or 2027 even, so maybe 2028.
Right.
Other questions?
This is your chance. You see how knowledgeable he is, so yeah.
And I'll be sticking around for the rest of the session, so if something comes up, you can reach out afterwards. But all right, so
Okay, well, thank you very much.
thank you.
I think you were very appreciated by this audience. Yeah, it is recorded, so you told a lot of things very fast, but we can look again at it later, just a bit slower, and it will be fine. Yeah, I think for now and for us, it's a good time just to grab something to drink, and then we move on to the next part. So thank you very much. Yeah, you told us you would stick and just listen and whatever, and feel free to leave. We're very happy to yeah.
Cool.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you can grab something to drink over there, water or coffee, tea, whatever.
Ja, hoe wil je deze het is wel
Leg je zeker met al die horen, met al die collega's hoor. Ja, dat blijkt. Dat zie ik niet hoor. Nou ja. Ik ben echt een ander die dat best. Ja, dit is nou
Het is doodzonde, maar
Ja, en jij hebt nu cool. Wat tijd voor automatisering.
Ik ben eigenlijk bij ik ga het nu ook.
Wat zou jij?
Ik heb wat
Het wel even, maar leuk. Ja, weer het. Leiders. Dat ik probeer ik probeer nog daarmee dat niet te lezen. Ik weet dat het is, maar ook echt heel veel ik ken wat discussies hier wel verder tegen. Dat is heel kut. Dus ik heb hier een enorm schrift.
I just have some people over here. I think perhaps the main program will just be discussing, talking with each other. Do you hear me?
I can kind of hear you. It's really tough over the background noise.
Yeah, okay. I think the main program will be over. We'll just be having some discussions and talk about this or that. So, yeah, that's it. I think you have other things to do and to attend than waiting for something that might not happen here.
Fair enough.
Okay, yeah, we were very happy to have you here, and yeah, it's a very interesting subject. There's a lot of work to be done. So,
Absolutely is, yeah.
yeah.
And it will keep people busy too for a while. In particular with some of the updates I see coming down the pipe. So.
Yeah. I think next year we have to work very hard to get everything up to date. But yeah, it's done. So yeah, we just keep on working.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, thank you for having me.
Bye.
Yep. Hello.
Ik haak ook af, jongens.
Prima. Ja, vond je het wel leuk?
Hartstikke leuk. Jammer dat ik er niet bij kon zijn, maar ik moest letterlijk